What happened on August 15, 1997, when a tornado ripped through Grey County in Ontario, tearing apart farms and houses? Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. It was the second tornado that hit Williams Lake in 15 months. Its path was 21 kilometers long and 200 meters wide. This powerful tornado touched down at 7:20 p.m. near Desborough, Ontario, before its strike in Williams Lake. It happened this day in weather history. You had to sense that with a podcast called This Day in Weather History, that there would be a few stories about tornadoes. After all, they are the single most powerful and deadly forces of nature on Earth. Hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, monsoons are bigger, sure, but the tornado will literally cut through solid building structures like a bandsaw and throw previously thought to be immovable objects easily through the air like bingo balls in a game machine. While in Desborough, this tornado struck and devastated a farm owned by the Dietrich family, who huddled in their house cellar as it hit. While covered in a safe place, the roof was torn off the house, and then the house itself was flattened. By some miracle, the Dietrich family emerged unscathed. Trees across the property were snapped and twisted, and at a neighboring farm, a large shed was blown away. The tornado was not done. Not even close. Next, it continued to the east, leaving a path of uprooted and snapped trees, as well as many that were shorn off at their tops. West and north of Williamsford, barns and buildings were flattened, farmhouses damaged, and crops destroyed. But luckily, it missed the town itself. That brings us to the cottage community at Williams Lake. They were not so fortunate. Several cottages were damaged, two of which crushed to their very foundation and then totally swept away. Wait, swept away? What does that even mean? Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, and oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event, from when it happened, in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. And just to dovetail from that, if I can, I'd like to remind you where you can catch this podcast. If you might be picking this up off our site or from within a story, you can look up or ask for This Day in Weather History, wherever you normally listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Alexa, and now every day on yahoo.ca. One of the cottages that was destroyed in Williams Lake was owned by Rob Howard, where he and his buddy Ken Osborne were blown hundreds of meters out into the lake, along with the debris from their home. It sounds actually more like the force of a tsunami now, doesn't it? But the two friends were actually able to make their way back through a field of floating debris to get safely back on shore after the tornado had passed. Once back on land, they found articles of clothing scattered amongst the debris of wrecked cottages. They collected up and used t-shirts and underwear to tend to their cuts and lacerations. The two were hospitalized for their injuries, but were very lucky to have survived it all. Those there who witnessed the tragedy captured photographs of the tornado. Looking at it, you can see the textbook slender elephant trunk from cloud to ground, but what made it look all the more awesome was that it was backlit by the setting summer sun. Weather's crazy, man. I gotta tell you. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. Then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is August 16th. This is the day we tangle with the most destructive hurricane to ever hit Florida in terms of structures damaged or destroyed. Hurricane Andrew was a powerful and destructive Category 5 Atlantic hurricane that struck not just the Bahamas, but also the Gulf states of Florida and Louisiana on August 16th of 1992. It is this day in weather history with me, your host, Chris May.